Hello guys, today we'll be covering a 2019 action comedy miniseries called YOLK. The opening scene starts off inside a hospital room. We see a young student named Han who's been diagnosed with some illness. Suddenly, an alien creature appears and pushes its head through his window. Then, for a moment, we see nothing, when the window suddenly explodes. Later, when a nurse arrives to give Han his transfusion, the alien seizes her and then brutally murders her. Eventually, the alien consumes Han's body and becomes a part of him. At last, Han is seen fleeing the hospital. Next, we see two friends, Jim and Nina, eating in a restaurant. They're close friends, but Jim has a crush on her and plans to confess his love. But he changes his mind when Nina tells him that she may travel to the United States for a 2-year student exchange program. Hearing this, Jim appears to be upset. Suddenly, Nina's ex-boyfriend, Kyle, appears in the same restaurant. He then proceeds to tell Jim some negative things about Nina in an attempt to make him agitated and jealous. Next, Jim is on his way to his room when he suddenly collapses on the road. When he comes to his senses, Jim is in a hospital getting a diagnosis. The doctor informs him that he's been diagnosed with cancer and has only about 3 months to live. In the next scene, Jim enters his room where his friends Chris, Ben, and Stan are playing computer games. They're disappointed since they lost a match due to Jim's absence, while Jim is saddened by his cancer diagnosis. He tries to tell his friends about his terminal illness, but no one listens because they're too busy playing games. After that, we see a scene from space where a planet ejects an alien creature that resembles an egg yolk. That mysterious egg yolk thing travels through space to reach Jim's room on Earth. The alien then enters Jim's Coke can. Next, Jim consumes his Coke, but soon becomes irritated and dizzy and falls asleep. He begins to exhibit some extraterrestrial activity while sleeping. The YOLK alien inside Jim begins to learn Earth's language by commanding Jim from within and studying through his tablet. The next morning, Jim finds himself in the bathroom. Soon after, he notices a cross mark on the center of his chest and his hand, as if the alien is attempting to communicate with him from within. That cross mark is the YOLK alien, who's now inhabiting Jim's body. He tries to ask his friends for help, but no one takes him seriously. Then he looks for assistance on the internet. Soon after, a woman phones him and inquires about his condition and location, and also instructs him not to inform the authorities of his situation. Regardless, Jim attempts to notify the authorities. Confused about what's happening, Jim tries to kill the alien within his body, but fails, as the alien is influencing him from within to keep him from doing so. On the other hand, Han, who had previously fled from the hospital, is coming out from the city river. He then hears a sound that says, "Find the target," and proceeds. After some time, Jim manages to stab a knife through the cross sign in the center of his chest. A creature resembling a yolk comes outside of it. Jim then kicks it and locks it inside his bathroom. The YOLK alien tries to communicate with Jim and claims that it can cure his cancer. Jim listens to it and thinks about it for a moment. Suddenly, 2 cops named Bill and Patrick arrive in his room, as he's already notified them of an alien. The cops search his room for an alien but find none. The officer then warns Jim not to consume any drugs or drink excessively, and also not to report a false incident, otherwise they'll detain him. Next, the YOLK alien speaks to Jim and tells him that it needs a carrier to survive. It also keeps mentioning that it can cure Jim's cancer. Jim then thinks for a while and finally accepts the YOLK alien back into his body. Now, Jim's able to communicate with it. The YOLK alien then instructs Jim to eat so that both of them can gain energy. Meanwhile, we see Han return to his home where he finds his wife alone. He transforms his wife into an alien mutant called the Drones. In the next scene, Bill and Patrick arrive at the hospital where Han murdered a nurse earlier. When they discover the dead body, they're taken aback by the brutality of the incident. Slowly, Jim and the YOLK get to know one another. The YOLK tells Jim that it's assisted him in gaining superhuman strength. Following that, we watch Jim performing superhuman feats, such as jumping from one location to another, from one rooftop to another. Jim is overjoyed with his newly achieved superhuman strength. Next, Jim goes to his school where he runs into his friend Nina. He tells the YOLK what he knows about her. Following that, we see Jim interact with Kyle, and immediately he informs the YOLK about Kyle as well. Being a supportive wingman, the YOLK wishes to teach Kyle a lesson, so it takes complete control of Jim's body and attempts to assault him, but Jim stops it. Soon after, we see Jim and Nina discussing when she realizes that Jim fought with Kyle for her. Meanwhile, we see a woman spying on Jim through a camera. Bill and Patrick arrive at Han's house inquiring if he's home. Han's wife responds that he's not at home and sends them on their way. Next, the YOLK is surfing the internet for space and universe news. It's also studying various space equations and literature. Jim goes to the school, where he eats 4 plates of food and is on his 5th. His friend, Stan, is shocked to see Jim devouring 5 plates of food all by himself. Soon, Nina joins him and informs him that she received an offer for the exchange program, but did not receive any sponsorship. Then Jim goes to the tennis court to meet Kyle. He thinks Kyle is the reason Nina did not receive the sponsorship. When the two guys share their disagreement, Kyle challenges Jim to a doubles tennis match if he wants Nina to get the sponsorship, and Jim agrees. Next, Jim and his friend Stan compete in a duo tennis match against Kyle and his mate. During the game, the YOLK informs Jim about his planet, stating that only the Matrix has a sense of independence on his planet. The Matrix is similar to their brains, and all other individuals on that planet evolved from it. The YOLK emerges from the Matrix with an individual mind as well. This endangers the Matrix. That's why, in order to eradicate the YOLK, Matrix sent one of her clones to Earth. The YOLK further claims that the Matrix can clone and transform any human into its clone, known as drones. On the other hand, Han, the Matrix clone, looks for the YOLK with his drone wife. They soon arrive at the school compound after detecting the presence of the YOLK. Back at the tennis court, Jim defeats Kyle in the competition, thanks to the YOLK. Nina appears to be overjoyed after seeing Jim win. Next, a woman introduces herself as Grace and approaches Jim. She informs Jim that she's a member of the tennis club and wishes to speak with him. After a brief conversation, Jim recognizes her as the woman who had called earlier that day regarding his condition. Grace then exits after handing Jim her business card. Later that night, Han approaches Kyle and transforms him into one of his drones. We see Jim giving a test in his classroom, where he's having a tough time as he's woefully unprepared. The YOLK offers to help him with the exam, to which Jim gladly agrees. Before anyone could even finish the test, Jim writes all of the answers and leaves class early. The next day, the exam results are released. Stan and Chris both pass with an average number. Among all, Ben is the most diligent student in the class, and he passes the test with excellent grades. But they're all taken by surprise by Jim's performance in the exam, which outperforms even Ben. Later that day, Jim has a date with Nina, but he's having problems expressing his emotions to her, so the YOLK takes control of Jim's body and confidently approaches Nina. He even hypnotizes her and attempts to kiss her, but Jim regains his control and avoids the kiss. Later, the YOLK consoles him, saying he'll help Jim to impress Nina. That night, while Jim is going to his house, he bumps into Kyle on the way and they get into a fight. However, Jim is completely unaware of why Kyle is being violent. He believes Kyle is fighting with him because of the tennis match, but the YOLK detects the Matrix drone in him. The YOLK then asks Jim to let him take control of his body and kill Kyle, to which Jim agrees. Then Jim's body is taken over and the YOLK starts attacking Kyle. Soon after, the YOLK kills the drone within Kyle and consumes it to acquire power. The YOLK then informs Jim that he must relax in order to be active again and proceeds to sleep. Han's wife arrives on the scene and begins assaulting Jim. As the YOLK is sleeping, Jim is now alone and unable to fight off Han's wife. As the fight escalates, she attempts to kill him, but Grace arrives on the scene and saves Jim. Next, Grace takes Jim to her place and wants him to remove his clothes so she may see the YOLK inside him. But Jim refuses, believing she's flirting with him. On the other hand, Nina is at home with her friends. The girls talk about the restaurant incident and Jim's attempt to kiss her. In the next scene, when Jim returns home, he finds Stan, who's upset, waiting for him at the door. Stan discovers Jim's cancer report and is outraged since Jim did not inform him about it earlier. Jim tells Stan that he's feeling better and tells him not to worry. He also goes on to tell him about the YOLK situation he's dealing with and the superpower he acquired, but Stan does not believe him. To prove himself, Jim brings Stan to the rooftop and opens his shirt to show the YOLK inside his chest. Stan is astonished when he sees the YOLK. Meanwhile, Nina also happens to be on her building's rooftop at the same moment. She sees Jim half naked and is upset when she notices Stan with him. Now, Nina is convinced that Jim is gay. Candy, a local TV reporter who's a friend of Stan, enters Jim's room to interview him. He wants Jim to demonstrate his new powers on television and speak about the YOLK to make him famous. Jim, on the other hand, is not pleased and quickly sends Candy out of his room. Soon, the YOLK fully takes control of Jim's body and attempts to kill Stan. The YOLK is angry because he's already instructed Jim not to expose his identity to anyone or he'll face consequences. Jim is instructed to kill Stan right now since he knows his identity. Hearing this, Jim threatens the YOLK that if he ever tries to harm Stan, he would kill himself. Now the YOLK has no chance but to let Stan go because if Jim dies, he dies. Next, the police officer discovers Kyle's dead body on the road. Han and his wife are also present in the same location. As his drone is lying dead on the street, he says that he now needs more drones. So he enters a building and begins mutating some of the employees. Back in his room, Jim, Stan, and the YOLK are seen drinking beer and playing among themselves. Just then, Stan asks if the YOLK is male or female, to which the YOLK claims to be neither. Jim is curious about the YOLK as to how he studies. The YOLK then tells him that when Jim is sleeping, he studies human history and culture on the internet. He also talks about the murder in the hospital and believes that someone from his home planet has arrived on Earth and is carrying out the killings. Next, Nina and her friends are seen discussing last night's roof incident. She believes Jim has recently found out that he's gay. Nina then calls Jim, but he doesn't respond, so she goes to Jim's house to talk to him. In the next scene, we see Bill watching a tennis game, contemplating who's responsible for the recent killing. He believes Jim is the one who murdered Kyle. To add to his suspicion, he remembers how Jim phoned the cops a few days ago about an alien in his room. Next, when Nina reaches outside of Jim's room, Stan lies to her saying he's not inside, but Nina, wanting to meet him anyhow, says she'll wait for Jim outside. Meanwhile, Jim is unsure what to do next because he doesn't want to interact with her right now. The YOLK then suggests going to the hospital where the nurse was murdered to investigate the crime scene. Jim agrees. Just then, Han also reaches outside of Jim's room looking for him. When Nina asks Han who he's looking for, he gives Nina a scary look without saying anything. On the other hand, Jim jumps out of the window and runs to the hospital, but Han senses that and follows Jim to the hospital. After a few minutes, as Jim makes his way to the hospital, Bill is also seen at the same place. Jim then uses his superpowers to enter the hospital's building. Bill sees this unnatural event and is perplexed to witness this scene unfold right in front of his eyes. Soon, Jim walks into Han's room in that building. The YOLK then examines the crime scene and requests that Jim eat a weird flesh that's laying on the ground. Just at that moment, Han enters the room and attempts to murder Jim and the YOLK. He attempts to kill Jim by throwing the YOLK out of his body, but Jim is able to dodge Han's attacks. Somehow, Jim leaps out of the window and flees from there, but Han continues to pursue him down the busy street. Moments later, Bill enters the room to find no one inside. Click the link in the description down below for part 2.